Well, very good afternoon. My name is Siva. I'm responsible for the application transformation practice of Pivotal across Asia Pacific and Japan. I realized that I'm the guy in between the excellent demo of drinking coffee from reactive streams by Mark and your actual coffee break in a few minutes' time. So I'll try to be on time here, right? So we typically deal with helping large enterprises move their legacy monoliths into cloud-native software. So I was asked to speak about modernization of monoliths. I was just going to cover what the strangler pattern is, when to use it, and more importantly, when not to use it. And finally, if time permits, how do we actually go about implementing a strangler pattern? I realize this is a bilingual audience, so with the help of my Korean colleagues, I've come up with this little dictionary definition of what strangle is. But that's the easy way to define it. So let me talk about fruits, right? So I'm sure you recognize this is the fig fruit. And it has an interesting life cycle. So if you see, it starts off as a little sapling on a tree, on a big tree, and it slowly starts shooting its roots down towards the ground. Until you can see over the tree, the roots have started to go down to the ground and it starts to pick up all the nutrients from the soil that is meant for the host tree, and it actually starts to consume all that nutrient traffic, right? And then we have a big, beautiful fig tree. If you notice, some of it is actually loosely coupled as well, right? So that's your new big strangler fig tree in the place of an old tree, right? So when Martin Fowler saw this in Australia about 15 years ago, he said, wait a minute, this looks like an application that can slowly take on functionality from a legacy monolith application and then become something by itself. So he called it the strangler fig application. And as we technologists always do, we like to shorten things. So that became the strangler app, then it became the strangler pattern, and now we actually use it as a verb, to strangle or not to strangle. There's no violence here, it's just about trees. So in case we need a clearer description. In Pivotal, we like to think of it as an application owner owns a lot of applications. It's similar to the roads and highways department of a municipality. You will have small roads, you will have big highways, but if you need to change part of a big highway, you're not just going to stop traffic in one day, right? And this is the way we like to explain it to business stakeholders, and it's a whole lot easier for them to understand. Yes, you own that highway, traffic is going through that. You create what we typically call a, traffic manager. You could treat it as an LTM load balancer. In case of web apps, it's a proxy. Or if you have an API-based, target or legacy, you could even use an API gateway to route traffic away, right? From your legacy to your new system that is then slowly built up over time until you have the new highway or the application taking on the traffic from the old application, right? So this is pretty much what the strangler pattern is, a couple of different ways of describing it. I just wanted to ensure that there was a shared understanding of this pattern before we start discussing when to use it and then how to implement this pattern if we decide to use it, right? So this is a typical flow of how we go about figuring out which of your existing applications need to be rewritten and within rewrite, strangled, right? I'm not going to go through the details of this approach. We'll spend a little bit of time on how to strangle. But just to summarize, essentially, we first track business value. Assume you have a set of applications. Some of them could be of high business criticality. Some of them could be low, which is why you see many dots on that single axis, right? So the key is to understand how often is the application changed? How critical is this application to the top line, bottom line, or risk and compliance within an organization? Typically, these form the higher business value applications. And once you have that, the next important thing is to introduce the next axis, which is the technology complexity, or what we'd like to call technology wellness. 12-factor compatibility or 15-factor compatibility, right? Now, we all know technology landscapes are far more complicated. There are other dimensions, such as regional complexity. You could use the same code base in a different instance for a different country. And the business criticality and the amount of traffic that that country's instance takes through could be different. So you could potentially strangle it on a regional basis. Also, there are people-related aspects. There are some technologies that could be super stable, but you don't have access to good people to build, operate, and maintain that particular technology stack. So all those organizational, people, regional dimensions are sort of flattened in this easy 2D matrix. So you'd be familiar with this quadrant, right? Gartner calls it the time quadrant. We call it the re-matrix. But essentially, that is absolutely key to determine which application needs what type of strategy, right? And then we bring it to a backlog of how to work through, especially if there are multiple applications. But let's say there's just one application, and you're trying to figure out, it's a big application, and you're trying to figure out when to strangle. Then, just to zoom in on that quadrant, essentially, if it is low technical wellness and low business value, you could just rehost, sometimes even retire, right? And that's your lower left quadrant. If the technical wellness is high, it's a fairly recently written platform, but it is not providing much value to your business. There's no point in spending a lot of money and making it perfectly 15-factor compatible. You could re-platform and reap a lot of operational benefits, right? But let's say it's a fairly high business value application, right? And in case the technical wellness is pretty good, it's recently written, it's got a lot of investment from your businesses, then you could potentially refactor it and still have the benefit of, both operational as well as scalability within your new application. But, and this is where strangling comes in, let's say your business value is high, but your technical wellness is low, then you have no option but to rewrite it, right? And within rewrite, you have a couple of different options. One of them is strangling, right? Now, some of you who might have taken these sorts of decisions might go, hey, wait a minute, where is buy, right? The whole buy versus build debate that we talk of. Well, buy, you could pretty much use it anywhere, but the factor that you need to consider is this application or is this space critical to your organization? Does this define what your organization is made of, and does it help you gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace? Well, if it is, then the answer is it's rewrite, right? True story in a large enterprise. a bunch of architects and technology owners were busy discussing whether they should rewrite their existing CRM application or go out and buy something like a Siebel or a Microsoft Dynamics. The business users who requested this went very quiet for a few weeks. And the technology folks were trying to figure out why the business is quiet. Normally they're following up, saying, hey, when am I going to get my new system? They went very quiet. Well, turns out, while the technology department was busy discussing whether to rewrite or to buy or to do a combination of both, the business quietly went away and subscribed to Salesforce.com, right? So subscription of SaaS is also an option that we need to factor into this matrix. But assuming there is control over the code base, then these are the 4 typical options that are explored. And in case the business value is high and the technical wellness is low, then we would recommend rewrite, be it strangle or other options such as Big Bang rewrite. So when do we strangle, right? And when do we sort of do a Big Bang rewrite? One key factor is critical mass. Do you have the size of a monolith that is big enough to cause high risk if you were to change it in one time? So that's what we meant by code critical mass. And there's no magic figure. Assuming you don't have bloatware in that legacy monolith, I would just put in a benchmark at about 1 million lines of code, right? And the other thing is traffic throughput. How much of mission-critical traffic does this particular legacy monolith currently handle? And that's why you don't want to immediately cut over. If it's a piece of software that's running a healthcare facility or a core bank or a billing support system within a telco, you don't want to do Big Bang switches, right? You might have read in the news about many high-profile risks that were realized. The recent one is in Scotland, where a bank tried to cut over and they completely took out the banking services for their customers, their online banking services, for a few days. So you don't want to take that risk, especially when there is critical throughput, large user base, complicated large application, and high business criticality. Another factor that really impacts the decision is age, right? Age is a proxy for complicated, unknown business logic. Right? As you know, whenever applications become old, they start to accumulate technology debt, and suddenly we lose track of the small little nuances of business logic that are there in those millions of lines of code, right? There are large institutions that run software that are like 20, 30 years old. None of the folks who wrote those applications are even around in that application, in that enterprise, employed there. So there are a lot of secrets buried in old applications. You have to watch out for that. When there is a lack of business logic clarity, again, Strangler becomes a low-risk way of rewriting an application. Now, I spoke about all the benefits, right? But as you know, routing traffic, ensuring that we slowly move over, running 2 applications at the same time, these are costs associated with it. So there are overheads of using this pattern that we all have to be aware of as technologists when we recommend this. So when we talk to clients, they're like, yes, Pivot will enable us in modernization, teach us how to strangle. We're like, well, do you actually need strangling, right? Do you need to use the strangler pattern? Is our first question. These are some of the key factors used to determine whether we use the strangler pattern or not. So let's assume that we found an application that's large, that's critical, that needs to employ the strangler pattern of a risk-mitigated way of moving over to a new application. How do we go about doing it, right? So this is Pivotal's way of employing that strangler pattern. We call it the SWIFT methodology. It combines domain-driven design principles with Pivotal's experience of working with several enterprises around the world in migrating their monoliths over to a cloud-native stack. The first thing is obviously to define objectives and key results, right? Now, this is not something that we invented. Both qualitative and quantitative metrics are important. This was Andy Grove of Intel 30 years ago, but the principles are still valid, so we love to use this. We're very careful especially about the quantitative results, especially if it's techno-commercial. You shut down infrastructure, you save a lot of money, and the new app will save you a lot of money. But if you go through the infrastructure costing terms, and if it happens to be an all or none deal, 90% of retirement is still not going to get you any benefits. It's pretty much 100% or nothing. These are some of the examples that vary from enterprise to enterprise that you'll have to be careful about. Once we clearly understand the goals of where or why we're looking to strangle and modernize, we typically start off with understanding the business process flow. We like to use EventStorm. It's a very powerful tool invented by Alberto Brandolini recently. He conducts some excellent masterclasses. If you get a chance, please do attend it. But we EventStorm the legacy space, and the critical success factor of this technique is the presence of business subject matter experts. So the technique heavily depends on having multiple experts in one room brainstorming and coming up with an end-to-end process. Now, this is where strangling comes in. If we need to rewrite this whole thing, then we can typically, architect and design based on this end-to-end process. But we figure out what is that thin slice that can then be coded as the MVP of the new product. And that becomes your strangler application. It starts from there and then slowly expands. You could pick a happy flow. You could pick a peripheral flow. The key is to start small and start in a risk-mitigated way. This is pivotal secret sauce that we've developed over a period of time. Sean Anderson, my colleague, invented this approach where we took these heavy domain-driven design abstracts and concepts and practically employed it on the back of an EventStorm, where we essentially look at the blue stickies are potential service candidates and how they interact with the green ones, which are external systems, external to that particular space or domain, right? Once we have that, sort of a related activity is to outline the artifacts of the new strangler application. Now, it could be as simple as what new APIs it's going to have, what are the data considerations, what are the high-level stories, epics, at a very high level, functionality that that potential service needs to cover for the strangler application. And this, I would say, these steps up to step 5 would broadly map to your legacy methodology of architecture and design. Right? It's very quick. This is done in a matter of days, couple of weeks, maybe 3 to 4 maximum in case it's a huge system. And then we quickly get down to coding. And this is where we use best practices, test-driven development, pair programming, and other extreme programming principles to ensure that we have tested and working code pushed into production. Now, we discussed that we're just coding one small part of the application, right? So how are we going to strangle this and completely migrate the old application over? And the key is to learn and incorporate the learnings of this code in the form of how-to guides, or we call it recipes, right? Or patterns that can be rinsed and repeated by the other developers in a biggish team that's typically needed to strangle a large application. So if you've noticed, I've used a few methodologies, some principles such as TDD, principles such as quickly moving applications into production, which means the methodology alone can't help in a vacuum. So it has to be an approach of methodology that is combined with other powerful things, right? So we spoke about methodology, but you absolutely need a platform that can quickly receive these updates, can quickly divert traffic over. A platform that supports CI/CD, right? Which then also means that you need the right tools, be it backlog tracking, be it CI, CD, even streaming that Mark just walked through. So if you have a combination of platform, tools, and the methodology that we just discussed and I just walked through a minute ago, then that would create a culture of risk-mitigated movement of legacy monoliths onto target your modern, cloud-aware, cloud-native technology stack. And that happens over a period of time, right? Typically, we help our customers over a period of weeks, and then many times we're invited again because culture is not built overnight or, in a few weeks. It takes months and sometimes even years in a large organization. So that broadly is, what the strangler pattern is, when to use it, and how to execute the strangler pattern in case you decide to use it. We spoke about the fact that it's a risk-mitigated way to create a new application that slowly takes on traffic from an old application. When to use it? Absolutely only when the application that you're looking to retire is big and it's also business critical. It warrants to be rewritten, but in a risk-mitigated manner. How do we do it? We start off with business processes, interacting with business stakeholders, figuring out how they use the legacy monolith today, not how it was intended to work a few years ago, but how they're using it today, right? And we walk through the cycle of event storm, selecting a thin slice, doing the Boris notional architecture, creating some technology artifacts using what we call Snappy, and then coming out with tested working code that can be pushed into production repeatedly, and over a period of time, you can strangle that monolith. There was a lot of topics that I covered in the 20-odd minutes, so in case you need to read more or view videos, I would highly recommend these links as a good way to learn the pivotal Swift methodology. Event storming as a whole, this is Alberto Brandolini's website. App Continuum is a way to choose between a Big Bang rewrite, using XP principles, or a strangled way of risk-mitigated move. It's again bipivotal. And finally, Data Strangler is an excellent method of strangling it at the implementation level. It's a talk given by my colleague, David Julia, who is the labs director in Sydney, on how to use data to figure out if your new Strangler application is shaping up in the right way, especially when business logic is not well documented in your old application. So these are some of the recommended readings. I'm going to leave it there so you can take some photos. I know it's super short, so we don't have time for question and answers. I'll try and hang out in the coffee break area, so feel free to come over. Let's discuss. If you have any questions, I'm happy to attempt to answer them. And outside of this, if you need to give me feedback, please absolutely feel free to reach out to me by email or through LinkedIn, direct message, whatever way. I'd love to continue this discussion because it's an important topic. It's fairly complex and large as well. And all I'm trying to do here is to just give you that overview. So thank you so much for your attention and hope to see you later.